Restaurant employee. Let homeless little girl sing for food when the owner arrived. The hum of voices and the clatter of silverware filled the air as Mason wiped down the last table of the night. The dimly lit diner, a local staple in the heart of downtown, had been unusually busy, leaving him exhausted but satisfied with a job well done. He stretched his back and glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:42 p.m. "Hey, don't forget to lock up before you leave," Henry called from the kitchen, his voice gruff but efficient as always. The older man had run the diner for over 20 years, and every detail, from the shine on the counters to the behavior of the staff, was under his strict control. "Got it," Mason replied, though his mind was already on the walk home. His small apartment on the edge of the neighborhood wasn't far, but after a double shift, the thought of climbing even one flight of stairs felt like a mountain. As he approached the front door to turn off the neon open sign, Mason noticed a figure standing just outside. A girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, was peering through the glass with wide eyes. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her tangled blonde hair framed a look of both curiosity and hunger. Mason hesitated, his hand hovering over the light switch. The girl didn't notice him at first, her gaze fixed on the counter where fresh pies were displayed in a glass case. She was thin, too thin, and her bare feet on the cold pavement sent a pang through Mason's chest. He opened the door cautiously. "Hey there, you okay?" The girl startled, taking a step back. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She looked down, as if ashamed of being caught. "You hungry?" Mason asked gently, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. When she nodded, he added, "Come on in. I can get you something to eat." The girl hesitated, glancing behind her as though someone might pull her back, but then she stepped inside. The warmth of the diner enveloped her, and Mason noticed how she shivered despite the relative heat. "What's your name?" he asked as he guided her to a booth in the corner. "Lily," she said softly, her voice carrying a faint southern twang that hinted at a long journey. "All right, Lily. I'll get you something hot," Mason said with a smile, heading to the kitchen. He filled a plate with the day's leftovers, mac and cheese, roasted chicken, and a side of cornbread before setting it in front of her. Lily stared at the plate as if it were a feast for a queen. She picked up a fork and began to eat slowly, savoring each bite. Mason sat across from her, resting his chin on his hand. "You've got a place to stay tonight?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Lily shook her head, avoiding his gaze. "Not really, just around." Mason frowned. Before he could respond, the bell above the kitchen door jingled, and Henry stepped out, his brow furrowed at the sight of Lily. "What's this?" Henry asked, his voice sharp. "She was hungry," Mason explained, standing. "I couldn't just leave her out there." Henry crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a shelter, Mason. You can't just let people off the street in here. What if someone sees? It's bad for business." Mason felt his cheeks flush. "She's just a kid, Henry. I'll cover the food out of my paycheck." "It's not about the money," Henry snapped. "It's about the image. We have rules here. You're a good worker, Mason, but you've got to learn to stick to them." Before Mason could reply, Lily's small voice cut through the tension. "I can sing." Both men turned to her, surprised. Lily set her fork down and glanced nervously between them. If I sing, can I stay? Just for a little while?" Mason's heart twisted. She shouldn't have to offer anything, but he knew Henry's mind well enough to see the wheels turning. "Sing?" Henry said, skeptical. "She's good," Mason said quickly, though he had no idea if it was true. "Let her sing for the customers." Henry sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, but just this once." Mason nodded and motioned for Lily to stand. The girl hesitated before walking to the small stage in the corner, usually reserved for open mic nights. She looked out at the few remaining customers who had started to pay attention, curious. When Lily began to sing, the room fell silent. Her voice was delicate yet powerful, weaving a melody that seemed to touch something deep in everyone who heard it. Even the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner couldn't dim the magic of her performance. By the time she finished, the small crowd burst into applause. Mason grinned, but his relief was short-lived. Henry's face remained unreadable as he gestured for Mason to follow him into the kitchen. "You've got heart, Mason," Henry began, his tone cold. "But this isn't how I run my business. If you can't follow my rules, you can't work here." Mason swallowed hard. "You're firing me? For helping a kid?" Henry shrugged. "I'm running a diner, not a charity." Mason glanced back at Lily, who was watching from the booth, her expression guarded but hopeful. He took a deep breath. "Then I quit." Henry's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing as Mason removed his apron and tossed it onto the counter. He walked back to Lily and crouched beside her. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get out of here." Lily hesitated before slipping her hand into his. Together they stepped out into the crisp night air. For the first time in years, Mason had no idea what his next step would be, but as he glanced down at the fragile girl beside him, he knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't face it alone. The cold wind bit at Mason's face as he and Lily walked down the nearly deserted sidewalk. The city around them was quiet, the occasional sound of distant traffic or a passing siren breaking the silence. Lily clutched Mason's hand tightly, her small fingers icy against his palm. "You got somewhere in mind?" Lily asked hesitantly, her voice barely audible over the hum of a flickering street lamp above them. Mason hesitated. "Not yet, but we'll figure something out." The truth was he didn't have a plan. His meager savings wouldn't last more than a week, especially if they needed a motel. Yet as he glanced down at Lily, he pushed those thoughts aside. For now, getting her somewhere safe and warm was all that mattered. After a few hours of wandering, they found a small, run-down motel just off the main strip. The neon sign buzzed and sputtered, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. Inside, the clerk, a gruff man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, barely looked up as Mason handed over cash for a single room. The room itself was as uninspiring as the exterior. Faded wallpaper, a sagging bed, and a small TV mounted to the wall. But it was clean, and the heater worked, which was enough for Mason. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes scanning the room uncertainly. "It's not much," Mason admitted, setting his bag on the floor. "But it'll do for tonight." "It's nice," Lily said quietly, pulling her knees up to her chest. Her voice carried a tone of gratitude that made Mason's chest tighten. He forced a smile and sat beside her. "You need rest," he said, standing and pulling the thin blanket over her shoulders. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Lily nodded, curling up under the blanket as Mason settled into the armchair by the window. He stared out at the dark street, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed a job, a plan, something to give Lily stability. But as exhaustion overtook him, his thoughts blurred into dreams. The next morning, the sun filtered through the cracked blinds, waking Mason with a start. Lily was already up, sitting cross-legged on the bed, humming softly as she traced shapes in the condensation on the window. Mason stretched and rubbed his eyes. "Morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "You were snoring." "Was not," Mason said with a playful grin. He stood and stretched again. "Come on, let's find some breakfast." After a quick meal at a nearby diner, Mason began his search for work. He checked bulletin boards, walked into restaurants, and filled out applications wherever he could. Most places either weren't hiring or required experience he didn't have. By late afternoon, his optimism was wearing thin. "Let's try one more," Mason said as they approached a small bistro with a sign that read Oliver's Table. Unlike the gleaming chains on the main strip, this place had a cozy, lived-in charm. The smell of fresh bread and herbs wafted through the open door. Inside, the bistro was bustling but not chaotic. A man in his 50s, wearing a flour-dusted apron, stood behind the counter, directing a staff of young cooks with a steady but kind demeanor. His eyes landed on Mason and Lily as they stepped inside. "Help you folks?" he asked, his voice warm but direct. Mason stepped forward. "I'm looking for work. I've got experience as a server, and I can start immediately." The man raised an eyebrow, then glanced at Lily. "And the kid?" "She's with me," Mason said quickly. I need a chance." The man studied them for a moment before nodding. "Name's Oliver. We've been short-staffed since the holidays. If you're serious, I'll give you a trial shift. But the pay's modest, and I can't promise full-time yet." "Deal," Mason said, relief washing over him. That evening, Mason worked his first shift at Oliver's table. The bistro was a far cry from the rigid diner he was used to. The staff laughed and joked as they worked, and the customers seemed to enjoy the relaxed atmosphere. Oliver kept a watchful eye, but treated his employees with respect, stepping in to help when needed. Meanwhile, Lily sat in a corner booth, sketching on a napkin with a pen Oliver had given her. Every so often she glanced at Mason with a small smile, her cheeks regaining a hint of color. By the end of the night, Oliver approached Mason with a nod of approval. "You did good," he said. "If you're interested, the job's yours." "Thank you," Mason said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You'll need a place to stay, though," Oliver added, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can't have the kid hanging around the restaurant all day." Mason hesitated, unsure how to respond. Oliver sighed and continued. "I've got a spare room upstairs. It's not much, but it's warm. You can stay there until you're back on your feet." Mason stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do that for us?" Oliver shrugged. "You remind me of someone. Let's just say I know what it's like to start over." That night, as Mason carried Lily up to their new temporary home, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. The small apartment above the bistro was modest but cozy, with 2 beds and a tiny kitchenette. Lily plopped onto one of the beds and grinned. "See? Told you it'd work out," she said, her voice full of confidence. Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, don't get used to this. We've still got a lot to figure out." But as he tucked Lily in and sat by the window, watching the lights of the city below, he allowed himself a moment of peace. For now, they were safe, and that was enough. Life at Oliver's table quickly fell into a rhythm. Each day, Mason worked long shifts, clearing tables, delivering orders, and occasionally assisting in the kitchen. The work was demanding, but it came with a sense of camaraderie he hadn't experienced before. Oliver treated his staff like family, which only deepened Mason's gratitude for the opportunity. Lily, meanwhile, spent her days upstairs, sketching or humming softly while Mason worked. In the evenings, she often ventured downstairs to watch the bustle of the restaurant. It was during one of these evenings that everything changed. It started innocently enough. One night, the dinner rush was in full swing, with the tables packed and the air filled with laughter and conversation. Oliver, noticing Lily perched quietly in her usual booth, motioned her over. "You like to sing, don't you?" he asked. Lily blinked, surprised. "I guess." Oliver grinned. "How about giving it a shot? People love a good tune with their meal." Mason, overhearing the exchange, approached cautiously. "She doesn't have to." "I want to," Lily interrupted, her voice firm but excited. She looked at Mason with a determined smile. "It's just singing." Oliver gestured toward a small corner of the dining area where a microphone and an old guitar stood. "Go ahead, kid. Let's see what you've got." Lily hesitated for only a moment before stepping up to the makeshift stage. Mason watched nervously as she adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. The room quieted. customers turning their attention to the petite girl standing under the soft glow of the overhead light. Then she began to sing. Her voice was pure and haunting, carrying a depth that belied her young age. She sang an old folk tune, one Mason vaguely remembered from his own childhood, and the melody seemed to wrap around the room like a warm embrace. Conversations ceased, forks paused mid-air, and even the clatter of the kitchen slowed as everyone became captivated. When the song ended, the room erupted into applause. Lily blushed, offering a shy smile as she stepped down and hurried back to Mason's side. "Did I do okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason knelt beside her, his eyes filled with pride. "You were amazing." Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, customers were asking when the singing girl would perform again. Oliver, ever the businessman, saw an opportunity. "Lily," he said one evening as they prepped for the dinner rush, "how'd you like to make this a regular thing, a couple of songs every night?" Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Really?" Mason frowned. "Oliver, she's just a kid. She doesn't need that kind of pressure." Oliver held up his hands. "No pressure, just fun. If she doesn't want to, that's fine. But it'd be good for the restaurant, and maybe even good for her. A little confidence boost." Lily tugged on Mason's sleeve. "I want to." "Please?" Mason hesitated, torn between protecting Lily and supporting her enthusiasm. Finally, he sighed. "Okay, but just one or two songs. Nothing more." At first, the arrangement worked well. Lily sang a few songs each evening, and the customers loved it. Tips increased, the bistro grew busier, and Oliver was thrilled. Lily, too, seemed to thrive under the attention, her confidence blossoming with each performance. But as the weeks passed, the demands began to grow. Customers started requesting specific songs, and Oliver began hinting at longer sets. Lily, eager to please, obliged even when her energy began to wane. Mason noticed the changes immediately. Lily's once vibrant enthusiasm dimmed slightly, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. One night, after a particularly long performance, Mason found her curled up in bed, too tired to even eat dinner. "Lily," he said gently, sitting beside her, "you don't have to keep doing this if it's too much." "I like it," she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual spark. "It helps." "It helps the restaurant," Mason said softly. "But what about you?" Lily didn't answer, her eyes already closing as sleep claimed her. The next day, Mason decided to confront Oliver. He found him in the kitchen, overseeing a batch of freshly baked rolls. "Oliver, we need to talk," Mason began, his tone firm. Oliver glanced up, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's on your mind?" "It's about Lily. She's exhausted. This performing every night, it's too much for her." Oliver frowned. "Look, Mason, I get it, but she enjoys it, doesn't she? And it's helping all of us. The restaurant's thriving and the kids getting something out of it too." "She's a child," Mason snapped. "She shouldn't be carrying the weight of this place on her shoulders." Oliver sighed, setting the towel down. "You're right. Maybe I've been pushing too hard. I'll scale it back. But Mason, you need to understand. This isn't just about the business. That kid has something special. You can't hide her away forever." Mason said nothing, his jaw tight as he turned and walked away. He knew Oliver meant well, but the words still grated on him. That night, Lily performed one song instead of her usual 3. The customers were disappointed, but Mason felt a small sense of relief. After the last plate was cleared and the restaurant closed for the night, he found Lily asleep on the couch upstairs, a faint smile on her lips. As he tucked a blanket around her, Mason vowed silently to protect her from anything or anyone that threatened to dim her light, even if it meant standing up to Oliver again, even if it meant walking away. For now, they were safe. But Mason knew the road ahead would only get more complicated. The following weeks brought a delicate balance to life at Oliver's table. Lily's performances were reduced to just one song each evening, and Mason worked hard to shield her from the growing expectations of the bistro's regulars. Oliver, true to his word, refrained from pushing her too hard, though Mason could tell it pained him to limit the spotlight on what had become the restaurant's biggest draw. But life didn't remain calm for long. One chilly evening, as the dinner crowd gathered, Mason noticed a group of unfamiliar faces at a corner table. They were dressed more formally than the usual patrons, their polished shoes and tailored coats hinting at wealth. One of them, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, seemed particularly interested in Lily as she sang. Mason's instincts bristled. He stayed close to her during the performance, watching as the man whispered to his companions, occasionally pointing toward the stage. When Lily finished, the applause was thunderous, but Mason's unease lingered. After the last plate was cleared and the kitchen began to close for the night, the man approached the counter where Mason was tallying receipts. "She's got a gift," the man said, his voice smooth but assertive. "Your daughter, I assume?" Mason hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She's under my care." The man smiled, his teeth white and too perfect. "Well, she's incredible. My name's Victor Carlyle. I represent several young performers, help them develop their careers. I'd love to talk about opportunities for her." "She's not looking for opportunities," Mason said flatly, his grip on the counter tightening. Victor's smile faltered slightly, but he remained composed. "I understand your hesitation, but a talent like hers shouldn't go unnoticed. If you ever change your mind, here's my card." He slid a sleek business card across the counter before turning and leaving, his entourage following close behind. Mason stared at the card for a moment before slipping it into his pocket. He didn't want Lily to know about the encounter, but something about Victor's polished demeanor left a knot in his stomach. Later that night, as Lily slept upstairs, Mason sat by the window turning the card over in his fingers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's interest in Lily wasn't purely altruistic, but he also couldn't deny the seed of doubt growing in his mind. Was he holding her back by keeping her in this small, safe bubble? The thought gnawed at him as the city's lights blinked in the distance. The following week, Mason began to notice small changes. A few regular customers started asking more personal questions about Lily: where she was from, how old she was, whether she'd be performing at larger venues soon. Their curiosity felt intrusive, but Mason kept his responses vague. One evening, as he wiped down tables after closing, Lily approached him with a hesitant look. "Someone at the table tonight said they'd seen me before," she said softly. "They asked if I was that girl from the news." Mason's chest tightened. He knelt beside her, his voice steady despite the alarm rising inside him. "What did you say?" "I told them I didn't know what they were talking about," Lily said, her eyes darting nervously. "But Mason, am I?" Mason hesitated. He had avoided pressing Lily about her past, not wanting to overwhelm her or reopen painful wounds. But now, with the truth clawing its way to the surface, he realized they couldn't run from it any longer. "Come on," he said gently, guiding her to the couch. They sat together, and he took a deep breath. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but if there's something you're keeping inside, it might help to let it out." Lily fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, her brow furrowed. After a long pause, she began to speak. "I lived with my mom in a small town," she said, her voice trembling. "It was just the two of us. She worked a lot, but sometimes we didn't have enough for food or rent. One day she told me we were going to move somewhere better, but something happened." Mason waited, his heart aching as he watched her struggle to find the words. "She left me," Lily whispered. "She said she'd be back, but she didn't come. I waited and waited. Then I started walking. I thought maybe I could find her. Tears welled in her eyes, and Mason pulled her into a gentle hug. "You don't have to say anything else," he murmured. "You're safe now." But Lily's revelation only deepened Mason's resolve. If people were beginning to recognize her, it meant her mother, or others, might be searching. He needed to protect her until the time came when they could confront the past together. The next day, a new challenge emerged. A couple of customers, emboldened by the rumors swirling around Lily, approached Oliver directly, suggesting he should market the bistro as the home of the singing sensation. Oliver, tempted by the potential for profit, approached Mason after hours. "I know you're trying to keep her life private," Oliver began carefully, "but this could be good for all of us, her included. If we lean into her talent, maybe we can help her get noticed by the right people." Mason's temper flared. "We're not using her as a business strategy. She's not some meal ticket, Oliver. She's a kid." Oliver sighed, clearly torn. "I'm just saying maybe there's a way to do this without putting her at risk." "There isn't," Mason said firmly. "She needs stability, not a spotlight." The tension between the two men hung in the air as Oliver nodded reluctantly and walked away. Mason knew Oliver cared, but their priorities were fundamentally different. For Oliver, the bistro was his livelihood. For Mason, Lily was his entire world. That night, as Lily drifted off to sleep, Mason sat by the window again, his mind racing. The stakes were rising, and he could feel the walls closing in. Protecting Lily had always been his priority, but with her past creeping into the present and strangers taking an interest in her, he began to wonder if staying at Oliver's table was truly the safe haven it seemed. For now, he resolved to keep her close, to shield her from the growing attention. But deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger storm. The storm Mason had been dreading arrived one rainy evening, just as the bistro was closing. The rain lashed against the windows, and the sound of thunder echoed in the distance. Inside, the last of the customers were settling their checks, their laughter fading as the night drew to a close. Lily had already finished her song for the evening and was upstairs, tucked into bed after a long day. Mason was busy stacking chairs when the front door opened with a forceful jingle of the bell. A woman stumbled in, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face. Her coat dripped water onto the floor, and her eyes darted around the room with a mix of desperation and determination. Oliver, who'd been wiping down the counter, looked up in surprise. "We're closing," he began, but the woman cut him off. "Is she here?" she asked breathlessly, her voice cracking. "Lily, my daughter, please tell me she's here." Mason froze, the stack of chairs in his arms forgotten. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know she's here," the woman said, stepping closer. "I saw her picture online. Someone posted about her singing here. Please, I just need to see her." Oliver glanced at Mason, his brows furrowed with confusion. Mason set the chairs down and approached the woman cautiously. "Who are you?" he asked, though deep down, he already knew the answer. The woman looked at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I'm her mother. I've been looking for her for months. Please, I just want to see her." Mason hesitated. Everything about her, the exhaustion in her voice, the raw emotion on her face, seemed genuine. But he couldn't ignore the knot of uncertainty tightening in his chest. If this woman was telling the truth, what would it mean for Lily? For them? "She's upstairs," Mason said finally. "But I'm not letting you near her until we talk." The woman nodded, her shoulders slumping with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat at a corner table as the rain continued to hammer against the windows. Oliver, sensing the gravity of the situation, quietly excused himself to the kitchen, leaving Mason and the woman alone. "My name is Sarah," she began, her hands trembling as she gripped a mug of tea Mason had offered her. "I don't even know where to start." Start with why you left her, Mason said bluntly, his voice sharper than he intended. Sarah flinched but nodded. It wasn't supposed to be like that. We were struggling, rent, food, everything. I thought I could fix it. I told Lily we were moving somewhere better, but the truth was, I didn't have a plan. I panicked. Her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath before continuing. One day I went to look for work, and when I came back she was gone. I thought she'd wandered off, but no one had seen her. I searched everywhere, filed a report with the police, but they didn't have any leads. Months went by and I thought I'd lost her forever. Tears streamed down her face, and Mason felt his anger begin to soften. Then a friend sent me a picture from some blog, Sarah said. They wrote about a girl singing in this restaurant, and I knew it was her. I came as fast as I could. Mason leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He believed Sarah's story, but that didn't erase the pain Lily had endured or the risks of reuniting them too quickly. Lily had spent months thinking she'd been abandoned. Would she even want to see her mother? I need to talk to her, Mason said finally. She's been through a lot. Let me explain things before you see her. Sarah nodded, her eyes pleading. Just tell her I'm here, please. Mason climbed the stairs to their small apartment with heavy steps. He found Lily sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Hey, what's wrong? She asked, her voice groggy. Mason sat on the edge of her bed, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. There's someone downstairs who wants to see you. Lily tilted her head, confused. Who? Mason hesitated. Your mom. Lily froze, her expression unreadable. My mom, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. She says she's been looking for you, Mason explained gently. She saw a picture of you online and came here. Lily's hands gripped the blanket tightly. She left me, she said, her voice trembling. She promised she'd come back, but she didn't. Mason reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I know, and you have every right to feel angry or scared, but she's downstairs and she wants to talk to you. It's your choice, Lily. If you don't want to see her, I'll tell her to leave. For a long moment, Lily didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she nodded. I want to see her, she said softly, but only if you're there. Mason gave her a reassuring smile. I'll be right by your side. When they descended the stairs, Sarah rose from her seat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Lily stopped halfway across the room, staring at her mother as if trying to reconcile the image in her memory with the woman before her. Lily, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's me. It's Mommy. Lily hesitated before taking a cautious step forward. You left me, she said, her voice cracking. I waited, but you didn't come back. Sarah dropped to her knees, her sobs racking her body. I know, she cried. I know, and I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I'll never forgive myself for what I put you through. Lily stood frozen for a moment before rushing forward, throwing her arms around her mother. The two clung to each other, their cries filling the empty bistro. Mason watched from a distance, his own eyes misting as he witnessed their reunion. That night, as the rain subsided and the city grew quiet, Mason sat by the window in their apartment, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few hours. Lily was asleep in the bed beside her mother, the first genuine smile on her face in weeks. For Mason, the reunion was bittersweet. He had promised to protect Lily, and now it seemed his role in her life might be coming to an end. But for now, he allowed himself to feel grateful for her safety, for her joy, and for the bond they had built, no matter what the future held. The following days brought an unexpected sense of calm to Mason's life. With Sarah's return, Lily was no longer carrying the weight of loneliness, and Mason saw a brightness in her that he hadn't seen before. The girl who had once clung to him for safety now laughed more freely, her shoulders less tense, her smiles more genuine. Sarah, for her part, was determined to make up for lost time. She spent hours with Lily, drawing, talking, and singing together. Despite her flaws and past mistakes, it was clear to Mason that Sarah's love for her daughter was unwavering. Watching them bond brought Mason a bittersweet sense of relief. Lily was finally finding the stability he'd fought so hard to provide. But with that relief came the realization that his role in Lily's life was shifting. She no longer needed him in the same way. And though he was proud of the person she was becoming, the thought of stepping back filled him with an ache he couldn't quite shake. One evening, Oliver called Mason into his office. The bistro had closed for the night, and the hum of the dishwasher in the background was the only sound as Oliver leaned back in his chair, eyeing Mason thoughtfully. "You've done a lot for that girl," Oliver began, his tone unusually soft. "I don't think I ever told you how much I respect that." Mason tilted his head, unsure where this was going. "Thanks, Oliver, but she's got her mom now. I think things are starting to settle down." Oliver nodded. "That's good, but I've been thinking I want to help too. Sarah's been asking about work, and I figured we could find something for her here, maybe part-time to start." Mason blinked, surprised. "You'd do that?" Oliver shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This place is built on second chances, Mason. You should know that better than anyone." Mason grinned. "Thanks, Oliver. I think that'd mean a lot to her." Over the next few weeks, Sarah began working at Oliver's table, starting with simple tasks like taking inventory and helping in the kitchen. Though she was nervous at first, she quickly proved to be hard-working and eager to contribute. The customers warmed to her kind demeanor, and Mason noticed that even Oliver seemed lighter, his usual gruffness softening whenever Sarah was around. Meanwhile, Lily continued to sing in the evenings, but now it was entirely on her own terms. Some nights she performed, other nights she sat in her usual booth, sketching or chatting with customers. The pressure that had once weighed on her was gone, and Mason could see how much happier she was. One afternoon, as Mason helped Sarah organize the supply closet, she turned to him with a hesitant smile. "I've been meaning to tell you something." "What's that?" Mason asked, glancing over his shoulder. Sarah took a deep breath. "I got a call from a shelter back in my hometown. They're offering me a place to stay and some job training. It's a chance to really get back on my feet." Mason straightened, a mix of emotions washing over him. "That's great, Sarah. You deserve it." She hesitated. "I want to take it, but only if Lily agrees. She's been through so much, and I don't want to uproot her again if she's not ready." Mason nodded, his chest tightening. "You should talk to her. She's stronger than you think." That evening, Sarah sat down with Lily and explained the opportunity. Mason lingered nearby, pretending to organize the bookshelf while he eavesdropped. "What do you think, sweetie?" Sarah asked. "It's a chance for us to start fresh, but I won't do it if it makes you unhappy." Lily fiddled with the hem of her shirt, her expression thoughtful. "Will Mason come with us?" Sarah's face fell slightly. "Mason has his life here, honey, but we'll visit him all the time, I promise." Lily looked over at Mason, her eyes wide and uncertain. "You'll still be my family, right?" Mason crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "Always," he said firmly. "No matter where you go, you'll always have me." Lily nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Okay, let's do it." The days leading up to their departure were a whirlwind of activity. Mason helped Sarah pack, while Lily made goodbye cards for the staff at Oliver's table. On their last night in the city, the bistro hosted a small farewell party. The regulars gathered to wish Sarah and Lily well, and Lily performed one final song, a heartfelt rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that left not a dry eye in the room. After the party, Mason walked Sarah and Lily back to the apartment. As they stood at the door, Lily threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Mason held her close, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got a big, beautiful life ahead of you, Lily. Go make the most of it." The next morning, Mason stood outside the bus station, waving as Sarah and Lily boarded the bus. Lily pressed her hand to the window, and Mason did the same, holding her gaze until the bus disappeared down the street. As he walked back to Oliver's table, the city felt quieter, emptier. But deep down, Mason knew he'd done the right thing. Lily was safe, happy, and loved, and that was all he'd ever wanted for her. The weeks following Lily and Sarah's departure were quieter than Mason had anticipated. The usual hustle and bustle of Oliver's table remained, but without Lily's laughter filling the upstairs apartment or her soft humming during her performances, something felt missing. Mason threw himself into his work, filling the silence with activity. He took on extra shifts, helped Oliver experiment with new menu items, and even volunteered to repaint the bistro's exterior. But no matter how busy he stayed, thoughts of Lily crept into his mind. Her smile, her resilience, and the way she had changed his life forever. One evening, as Mason was finishing his shift, Oliver approached him with a bottle of beer and a rare grin. "Come on," he said, jerking his head toward the bistro's back patio. "You've been working too hard. Time to relax." Mason chuckled, wiping his hands on a towel. "You're the boss." They sat on the patio, under the fading light of the evening, the sounds of the city humming softly in the background. Oliver popped the caps off the bottles and handed one to Mason, who took a sip before leaning back in his chair. "She called today," Oliver said after a moment, watching Mason out of the corner of his eye. Mason straightened. "Who?" "Sarah. Said to tell you they're doing well. Lily's settling into school, and Sarah's loving her job training. They wanted to thank you again for everything." Mason smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "That's good to hear. I've been wondering." "They didn't forget about you," Oliver added, his voice gruff. "Said Lily's already planning her first trip back to visit." Mason chuckled, a warmth spreading in his chest. "That sounds like her." As the weeks turned into months, Mason found himself gradually moving forward. He continued to work at Oliver's table, earning a promotion to assistant manager, and even began taking night classes at a local community college. Inspired by his time with Lily, he started studying social work, determined to help other kids who might be facing similar struggles. Oliver, too, seemed to grow from the experience. He became more compassionate, more willing to take risks for the sake of his staff and community. The bistro, once just a business, evolved into a place where people felt seen and supported, a reflection of the lessons Mason and Lily had taught him. One night, Mason sat on the roof of his apartment building, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders as he gazed up at the stars. It had become his favorite place to reflect, a quiet spot where the chaos of the city melted away. As he traced constellations with his eyes, his phone buzzed with a text. He picked it up, smiling as he read the message. "Lily, hey Mason, guess what? I got a solo in the school choir. Mom says we can visit next month. Miss you lots." Mason's grin widened, his heart swelling with pride. He typed a quick reply, his fingers moving instinctively. "Mason. That's amazing, Lily. I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to see you. Miss you too." He set the phone down and leaned back, his gaze returning to the sky. The ache of missing Lily and Sarah lingered, but it was accompanied by a deep sense of peace. They were safe, happy, and thriving, and that was all that mattered. As the stars twinkled above him, Mason reflected on how much his life had changed since that fateful night at the diner. He had started as a young man with no direction, simply going through the motions of life. But Lily had shown him the power of kindness, resilience, and purpose. Through her, he had discovered not just a deeper sense of empathy, but a new path forward. Mason closed his eyes, letting the cool night air wash over him. The city buzzed softly in the distance, a reminder that life was always moving, always changing. And while his journey with Lily and Sarah had taken an unexpected turn, it had left him with something he would carry forever: the knowledge that even the smallest acts of kindness could transform lives. Under the stars, Mason smiled, grateful for the journey that had brought him here, and hopeful for the future still to come. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.